Today we will go over the importance of the Egyptian chronology and how it correlates with the biblical timeline. The majority of ancient chronologies in the Middle East do not have independent dating systems. Ugarit is dated via Hittite and Egyptian correspondence, and the Hittites are dated through their relations with the pharaohs such as Ramses II at the Battle of Kadesh. The Minoans and Mycenaeans are also dated via correspondence with Egypt based on pottery shards found at Tel El Marna, dating to the late Helladic period. This makes Egyptian chronology the mother of most ancient timelines. Because of this, we can observe the biblical timeline aligning properly with the Egyptian. We will start at the beginning of their encounters with Abram. In Genesis chapter 12, Abram and Sarai traveled to Egypt because of a severe famine. The pharaoh then takes interest in marrying Sarai, so Abram pretends he is not married to Sarai in case the Egyptians try to kill him. This brings about a severe plague upon Pharaoh and his household, until Pharaoh gives Sarai back to Abram. According to the translation of Papyrus 1116a, Pharaoh Kheti IV warns his son Merekare to beware of the Asiatics because of their deceptions. This could be attributed to Abram lying to the Egyptians about his wife, since Asiatics was a term used for anyone generally living east of Egypt. Apparently, Merekare heeded his father's warnings. One of the finest works of ancient literature reads, "I crossed in a barge without a rudder. By the force of the west wind, I passed to the east of the quarry, at the height of the mistress of the Red Mountain. Then I made my way northward. I reached the walls of the ruler, which were made to repel the Asiatics, and to crush the sandfarers. I crouched in a bush for fear of being seen by the guard on duty upon the wall. I set out at night. At dawn I reached Petan. I halted at the Isle of Kimmor. An attack of thirst overtook me. I was parched. My throat burned. I said, 'This is the taste of death.' I raised my heart and collected myself, when I heard the lowing sound of cattle and saw Asiatics. One of their leaders, who had been in Egypt, recognized me. He gave me water and boiled milk for me. I went with him to his tribe. What they did for me was good." Although the main character of this story is considered fictional, the geographical locations and tribal people are considered unembellished truths. In Genesis chapter 41, Joseph rises to power and becomes second in command under Pharaoh. We have evidence of this happening under the rule of Amenemhet III, who built his pyramid right next to the canal named Bar Yosef, which was built by Joseph in order to starve off the famine. According to the Masoretic text, the Israelites were in Egypt for 430 years, but according to the Greek Septuagint, they were in Egypt and in the land of Canaan for 430 years altogether. Paul seems to indicate that the Greek Septuagint is correct when he speaks in Acts chapter 13. The historian Artabanus writes that the pharaoh Khnopheres Hobotech IV raised Moses as his adoptive grandson within the walls of the palace. During this time period, a list of Semitic slaves appears, the majority being female, just as the Bible speaks of the Hebrew males being killed off as infants. These writings are housed in the Brooklyn Museum. According to the writings of Manetho, Ptolemaeus is the pharaoh of the Exodus, also known as Pharaoh Dudimos. In the Ipuwer Papyrus, written in the Middle Kingdom by Ipuwer himself, says these accounts as though he is a witness. The river is blood. Trees are destroyed. No fruit nor herbs are found. Forsooth, gates, columns, and walls are consumed by fire. The land is not light. Forsooth, the children of the princes are dashed against the walls. Forsooth, the children of princes are cast out in the streets. Just as the Bible speaks of these plagues. After the Israelites left Egypt, they made their way to Mount Sinai, where Moses was instructed to write. We know the first books of the Bible had to have been written by Moses, or at least someone fluent in both Egyptian and Hebrew, since certain words that are written are actually Egyptian in origin. Because Egypt was left in such disarray, they were easily taken over by the Hyksos. During this time period, the Westcar Papyrus was written, which speaks of tales of magicians, wherein one is able to split the waters of the Nile in half, though some scholars give this papyrus a later date. Now we come to the age of Amarna, during the famous rule of Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and Pharaoh Tutankhamun. The Amarna letters are an archive of diplomatic communication between Egyptian and Canaanite peoples. These letters are a treasure trove of correspondence between kings, which help to align chronologies. The Amarna letter EA39, spelling of Amaluti Iadu, and Amaluti Tzabe Iadu, referring to the Hebrew Yehuda, meaning Judah in English. The translation of this letter means men of Judah and soldiers of Judah. In the Amarna letter 170, Aziru is identified with Hadadezer, the Syrian king of 2 Samuel chapter 8, and Lupaku, meaning man of Paku, is identified with Shobek, which means he of Paku, the Aramean army commander of 2 Samuel chapter 10 verses 16 and 18. Labea, a ruler of the Amarna letters, is identified with the Hebrew king Shaul, or as we know him in English, King Saul. Dedua, in Amarna letter EA256, is none other than King David. Mutbaal, the writer of this letter, is identified as Ishbaal, also known as Ishbosheth. These two names have exactly the same meaning, man of Baal. Ben-Amina is also mentioned in letter EA256 and is identified as the Israelite chieftain in 2 Samuel 4, who would later betray and assassinate Ishbosheth. And Yeshua is identified as the Hebrew Ishai, or as we call him, Jesse, the father of David. Ahab, the subject of letter 256, is held to be the same as the biblical Joab, in English, Joab, the nephew of King David. And letter EA364 was written by Ahab. The sons of Labea in the Amarna letter 250 also speak of Mutbaal and Dedua once again, the latter being the son-in-law of Saul. Now that we know that King David and Akhenaten ruled at roughly the same time period, this information finally lays to rest the debate over whose religion came first. And as far as knowing if Akhenaten's great hymn to the Aten is a copy of David's Psalm 104, or if it is the other way around, I don't think it really matters. According to the Hittite treaty tablet, Woshmaria Shatap Naria, or Shesha for short, is the Egyptian name of the famous pharaoh Ramses II. His daughter was married to King Solomon, her name being Bithyanah, or Bithya in Hebrew, meaning daughter of Yahweh. The Bible says in 1 Kings 9:16 that Pharaoh, king of Egypt, had gone up and captured Gezer, and burned it with fire, and killed the Canaanites who lived in the city, and had it given as a dowry to his daughter, King Solomon's wife. A stele inscription in the Amada temple in Nubia lists Ramses II's son Merneptah as the plunderer of Gezer. Most likely Merneptah helped his father with the conquering of Gezer, since Pharaoh Merneptah himself would have been much too old for campaigns when he became ruler of the nation. And the famous Merneptah stele located at Thebes says, Gezer is captured, Yanoam is made non-existent, Israel is laid waste, and his seed is not. In 2 Chronicles chapter 12 verse 9 it says that Pharaoh Ramses attacked Jerusalem and carried off the treasures of the city. Scholars believe this is due to Solomon's ill treatment of Pharaoh's daughter, so Ramses came to seek revenge. According to the Harris Papyrus, Isru, the Syrian took control over Egypt, along with the help of Arza, master of the palace of Israel. Arza is mentioned in the book of 1 Kings, chapter 16, verses 8 through 10. The Bubastite portal of Karnak depicts a list of city-states in Israel conquered by the Libyan pharaoh Shoshenq I during the reign of Jehoahaz, as he took over the Aramean control of Hazael, thus saving the kingdom of Israel. This is also recorded in the fragment of a large stele found in Megiddo. Hazael's initial takeover of Israel is mentioned in 2 Kings chapter 10, verse 32. The next king mentioned in the Bible is Taharka, king of both Ethiopia and Egypt, who waged war against Sennacherib during the reign of Hezekiah, king of Judah, in 2 Kings chapter 19, verse 9, and Isaiah chapter 37, verse 9. Pharaoh Necho, or as Herodotus and the Bible call him Pharaoh Necho, was the ruler that King Josiah tried to go up against in 2 Kings chapter 23, verse 29, and in 2 Chronicles chapter 35, verse 20 through 24, and captured Jehoahaz in 2 Kings chapter 23, verse 34, and in 2 Chronicles chapter 36, verse 4. He is also recorded as being defeated by Nebuchadnezzar in Jeremiah chapter 46, verse 2. The Nebuchadnezzar Chronicle confirms that Nebuchadnezzar did in fact defeat Necho's army at Carchemish, just as the Bible said. Followed by Pharaoh Apris, also known as Hophra. As Jeremiah writes, "Thus says the Lord, Behold, I will give Pharaoh Hophra, king of Egypt, into the land of his enemies, and into the hand of those who seek his life, as I gave Zedekiah, king of Judah, into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, his enemy who sought his life." Which now brings us to the time of Cyrus the Great, the creator of the largest empire the world had yet seen, giving him the title of King of the Four Corners of the World. After Cyrus conquered Babylon, many Israelites went to Egypt in 537 BC. Heliopolis itself had become a resting place for many Jews that did not find it quite so comfortable to be back in Israel. There had never been a larger Jewish community in the Mediterranean than in Egypt. When Alexander the Great passed away, his companions the Ptolemies reigned over Egypt. They employed 70 Jewish scholars to translate the Bible from Hebrew into Greek. It is one of our oldest copies of the Old Testament, known as the Greek Septuagint, mentioned earlier in this video. The Septuagint was presumably made for the Jewish community in Egypt, since Greek was the common language throughout the region under this dynasty. During the Ptolemaic rule, Greeks such as the later Plutarch were morphing the Egyptian deities with that of the Greeks in order to unify the two cultures, along with other people groups that had found their way into Egypt, which gave rise to Egypt's creation story closely resembling the story of Genesis chapters 1 through 4. Because of these close relations between kings throughout the years, it gave rise to many Egyptian stories closely resembling those of the Torah, such as the Tale of Two Brothers, a story resembling Joseph's wherein the older brother tries to kill the younger after his wife falsely claims the younger brother had attempted to sleep with her. The younger brother narrowly escapes and becomes Pharaoh at the end of the story. The veritable history of Setnikamoset II, written on Papyrus 604, discovered in Aswan, wherein foreigners curse Egypt with plagues, one being the land of Egypt would be in darkness for 3 days and 3 nights, along with a magician speaking of water turning to blood. The Papyrus of Ani tells of the god Atum destroying all creation with a flood and turning himself into a serpent. The Famine Stele, which speaks of Pharaoh's second-in-command, predicting a 7-year famine and saving up enough food for storage. Though some of these stories could have been passed down for quite some time before being written, since many have oral components with repetitive word usage, meaning the story was most likely told over a long period of time before actually being written down. The Temple of Horus, which was also being built and was not completed until 57 BC. The stories of Horus from this time period slightly resemble the earlier prophecies of Isaiah and Hosea concerning the coming Messiah. In the 2nd chapter of Matthew, verses 13 through 23, after the magicians visit the Holy Family, an angel appears to Joseph in a dream and guides him to flee to Egypt with Mary and the infant Jesus, since Herod sought to kill Jesus, thus fulfilling the prophecy of Hosea chapter 11. Even though Egypt was under the same Roman control, it is no wonder why Joseph would be told to flee to Egypt, since they were so welcoming of the Jews. After the death of Christ, the disciple Mark made his way to Egypt, where the gospel spread like wildfire among the Egyptians, and are now known as Coptics. The temples that were previously houses of worship for the Egyptian deities were soon turned into churches where they worshipped Christ, such as the Amada Temple in Aswan mentioned earlier. Many of the original rituals and hymns were previously to honor the pharaoh and the Egyptian gods, are now still sung by the Coptics to worship Christ. One Coptic Christian I spoke with said this: God permitted it to happen and to think like this way in Egypt, because God was preparing the Egyptian mentality to accept the gospel later, because of these many similarities.